We are recording. Yes. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the 1455 interview. This is the first time the 1455 interview has gone on the road. And what I wanted to say is the only thing better than seeing people's books behind them for the obligatory back shot is palm trees. So this is not a screen shot. I've got the heat and humidity of Miami behind me, and I'm loving it. So welcome to Miami, coming at you via Minneapolis. So we've got all kinds of worlds colliding here. That being said, if this is your first time checking us out, thank you. This is a recurring series as part of 1455's free programming. And this is my favorite because I love having the opportunity to talk to writers about how they became writers and why they write. And this is doubly special because our guest today has already been a featured author in our monthly author series. So this is just a wonderful chance to check back in with Jeannine Ouellette. And I have to start by saying, before I read her bio, that her unbelievable, brilliant memoir, The Part That Burns, has really been getting some attention and some well-warranted love, both critically, commercially, and across kind of the literary world. So it's a delight to see. And that's my takeaway from this. You're going to learn about her and you're going to want to go out and buy this book, but take it from me, having read it and loved it. I can't recommend it more strongly. So I'm really excited to hear her backstory, having known a little bit more about her life. I have no idea what she's going to say for a bunch of these questions, so I can't wait. So let me introduce our guest. Jeannine's essays and stories have appeared widely, including in North American Review, Narrative, Pen Review, Proximity, and more. She's a former fellow of Malay Colony for the Arts and Brush Creek Foundation for the Arts, and her work's been published in several anthologies, including Ms. Aligned, which is a great name, Women Writing About Men and Women's Lives, Multicultural Perspectives, as well as many contests. She teaches writing through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop and at the University of Minnesota. She lives with her family in Minneapolis, near the banks of the Mississippi, where she's working on her first novel. Her memoir, The Part That Burns, has been described by Joyce Carol Oates as, quote, simply beautiful, precisely imagined, poetically structured, compelling, and vivid. And I, in my humble way, would not want to compete with Joyce Carol Oates. I would just add that I agree with that. And it was really an important and beautiful read for me. So Jeannine, welcome back. It's wonderful to be with you. And why don't you kick it off and just tell us how everything's going? I know, because we talked before we came on, but give us, what's been going on since February when last we spoke?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was such a nice intro. Thank you for that, Sean. Yeah, and it's been good. It's been really, really busy and really good. I did, I think, something like, more than 25 author events and readings and reading series and interviews between the launch in February and now. And so, I'm tired in that really good kind of way. It's been really fun and really gratifying and really, there's almost like, in spite of the fact, tired in that good way, and that it's been really strengthening.
Yeah.
To meet so many people and deepen so many relationships, and also humbling, to receive so much help and support and encouragement and enthusiasm from it feels like just from everybody I care about and a whole bunch of people that I don't know or haven't known. And so it's been a really lovely experience.
I'm so glad to hear that. And, your book is in many ways a gift. It's a very selfless, brave document. And I think people, to me, as I said before we came on, I'm delighted and happy, but I'm not surprised. Good writing finds its audience, and books that are frankly a little more meaningful than your kind of run-of-the-mill. We as writers celebrate any publication. We want writers to do well, but books that are written that are not navel-gazing, frankly, deserve a wider audience, and those connections are very valid. So I think this is happening for a reason, and it's not a surprise. So,
well, thank you so much.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
You're in that group of people, that's just been a part of that incredible experience to feel like really like caught and held up by the writing and reading community. But it's been really great. So thank you.
Outstanding. All right. So enough with the pleasantries. Let's get down to business. The 1455 interview. All right, Jeannine, what is the first book that made you want to be a writer, or if you prefer, a book that changed your life?
So I wanted to be a writer so I really don't remember before I wanted to be a writer. So that's pretty hard to answer, but I think I would get close with this book, which I think it's quirky and unexpected. But do you know the young adult or children's? I don't know back in the day how it would have been categorized, but the book is called "Where the Red Fern Grows" by Wilson Rawls. You know
Yes.
that one? Yeah.
Yes.
So when I was in ninth grade, we had this assignment where we had to choose a book and read and memorize a section of the book to present to the class. And it was at a time in my life I was very truant from school. I was, going through, this was like kind of close to like my foster care placement. Things were really hard. I was just not attending a lot.
Yeah.
And this was like one of those teachers who was famed for his strictness, and I really respected him. And it was English, so it was like my subject.
Yes.
Anyway, you weren't supposed to you weren't even be able, like his rules were really strict. So you shouldn't even be able to pass the presentation assignment unless you had fulfilled all of the other attendance requirements of the project along the way, which I had not fulfilled any of them. And I bust into class somehow I showed up on the day of the presentation, and I did my delivery of this scene from Where the Red Fern Grows. And, for those who don't know this book, it's about a boy who's in Appalachia and, maybe set like in the 40s, I'm guessing, or somewhere in there. And he really wants these hunting dogs. Like, this is just a book that has for the zero things that would have appealed to me at the time. I don't know how I stumbled on it. But, really, it's a book about love and loss and tenacity. And, it's beautiful. And I think, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think it's probably the first book that made me cry. And I think that's why I loved it so much. And so I picked a really emotive scene that's what I recited. And the long and the short of it is that he gave me an A, in spite of the fact that I didn't deserve it, which he made note of, in his remarks. And I think that something about that, I didn't understand it at the time, but when I reflect on it, I think that I was recognizing something about what literature can do. And I did want to share that. And I wanted to share it in a way where everybody in that room was going to feel what I felt when I read that section. And, I think that implanted in me like a power. And because I got the A, I knew that the power worked, like it worked, even on this really strict teacher. So that was an experience that embedded something really deep in me about writing.
What a beautiful response. And I think what you're really capturing there is the proverbial elusive magic of art, which is, I think all of us can remember, whether it's crying or just having a feel like real human feelings for characters in a book, that we realize it's more than that. You can't really describe it. Of course, they're not real in any, literal sense, and yet they're more real. And that's an indelible, I think many writers will talk about. That's when they realize like there's something magical going on here that I want to try to either capture or revisit as often as possible.
Yep, that was it.
Okay. So how about if you could describe, and I acknowledge always that these are impossible questions, but it's fun to try. Who's your most profound artistic influence?
They are impossible questions. Thank you for acknowledging that. I think, just because of where I'm at in my own trajectory as a writer right now with this particular book that just came out in February, it's fair to say that, like you said earlier, we can revise our answers at any time. But, in the process
Absolutely.
of evolving, I think I have to credit Dorothy Allison. Whose work I discovered in my 20s, when a lot of the events in my book are that's sort of when, the shit is really hitting the fan, for the narrator, is at that time. And, she in Bastard out of Carolina did something that, while I'm not here to say it had never been done before, but she did it in a way and at a time that, much like with Where the Red Fern Grows, it changed my understanding of what was possible on the page. And not only that, it changed my life as a human being and a woman and a mom. Um, so yeah, so the way, and just, for anyone who doesn't know Dorothy's work, I mean, her handling of class and poverty um, and family dynamics, abuse, sexual abuse, but also love of family and complexity and originality. Just yeah, so spectacular. So I'm very, very grateful. I feel a huge debt to the trail that she blazed. And just to add, anyone who busted out with a novel, the work is, her book Bastard out of Carolina is highly autobiographical, but published as fiction.
Yep.
And is still banned in lots of schools and libraries, 30, is it what now? And yeah, more than 30 years later is pretty, then she did something,
That's right. Absolutely. And you're being typically modest if I'm not mistaken, and I'm pretty sure I'm not. She gave you a beautiful blurb for the part that burns, which is a real, I think, full circle kind of moment. Which is wonderful.
Yeah, and that was a moment on the whole, journey of this book's biography where I thought, okay, whatever happens now, I'm good.
Absolutely.
Dorothy Allison said she loved it, so I'm set. Everything else is frosting, and it did. It felt like that.
Yeah, good for you. I love it. I love it. All right, another easy one. An album or movie or both that you recommend without reservation.
Yeah, this one is a lot harder for me actually, because I'm a little bit, my kids would back this up. I'm a little bit like pop culture or contemporary culture illiterate. And it comes from, I think, a lot of reasons. Yeah, I don't know. But I have really, for the last, say, 10, 15 years or so, really fell in love with a singer named Sam Beam, and he performs under the Iron and Wine
Yes.
label. And he just, so I just chose kind of randomly our endless numbered days from his discography. Is that how you say that? But I really could have picked, like, especially any of his early work. And because he's an artist, he has the right to do this. We change, we want to try new things and, and push the boundaries of our work. And he definitely has done that. But I'm really attached to some of the earlier stuff. And oh my God, it's like, you're a poet, so you're going to know what I mean. But the interaction between his lyrics, which are absolutely poetry, you think of Art Garfunkel or some of the other like poets who were lyricists, and then the music is so complex and mind-blowing, and you put those two things together and it really is arresting, like in a way that I think is yeah, so I think he's a fantastic artist, and I think that's a fantastic album.
I'm so glad you brought that up. He has not appeared in this series yet, but I'm a big fan, and I agree wholeheartedly. He's able to evoke real emotion and images, and to me, I'll even take it a step further and say that's one of the things that's always just humbled me about music. Like I worship poetry, and it has its own magic, but when you have poetry combined with voice and music, it really just takes it to another level, and he does that.
He does. Yeah, it's crazy. So anyone who doesn't know his work, you got to go have a listen. One of the beautiful songs on that album is called "Naked as We Came," and short, haunting, gorgeous stuff. It's just so incredible and gritty and complex. And that's what I love about his work, is that it is very it's not it doesn't strike a single note. Like he just goes into all the places with it.
Yeah. And then you see what the guy looks like and you're like, okay, I get it.
I know,
He looks the part in all the right ways.
he sure does.
Okay, great answer. All right, another impossible one, but I love to give people, the writers, the opportunity to give a shout out. Is there an underrated author that you feel warrants more attention?
An underrated author. I'm going to give you kind of a cop out on this one. I would say that I'm going to like personify indie presses in general. Like, I think that we're at a time when, and I'm giving myself this note as much as anyone, but like we need to be actively reading and supporting, indie authors and indie presses, because it's it's always been hard, but the pandemic has worsened the plight of indie presses. And so I think that, the idea of we want a diverse literary landscape, and we want underrepresented voices, and we want stories that aren't going to find a home, or poetry that's not going to find a home. And the tiny power center that is now the big five. I think then we have to really actively seek out books and stories and poetry from indie authors and indie presses. And I'm not just saying that because
I hear you.
I have a book with an indie press. Like,
Right. Yep.
I feel like it's been an education, and I should have understood. I've always read indie stuff, but I mean to do it with a new fervor.
Well, thank you again. I sincerely appreciate that answer. Here, and one of the things, kind of a sub theme that's developed through all these conversations I'm having, and has really kind of reawakened, made me check myself. I'd like to think I was a decent literary citizen, but in the age of social media in particular, I really believe, and try to inspire exactly what you're talking about. The notion of being a good literary citizen is paying it forward without expectation of ROI, and doing your part, doing more than your part to
Mhm.
promote fellow writers, not realizing it's not a competition, and understanding, as trivial as it may seem, like I totally believe that the proverbial tide lifts all boats. Like, you're doing good for the world, in the literary world, and that comes back in a lot of ways. But I don't mean it to suggest that you're doing it because karmically it's going to come back. It's just it broadens your world as a writer and a reader. So I really appreciate you saying that, because I couldn't agree more.
And we're all in it together. And as somebody pointed out in one of the, my online writing groups that I'm a part of yesterday, someone was saying that they had just recently watched or read something, and I'm sorry that I don't remember what it was, but essentially it was for this particular writer, an eye-opening look at why we should not be ordering books from Amazon. And it just unpacked it in a way that like can happen for people, where like in that moment she was like, okay, I've got to reform this behavior. And I always knew it was important, but I didn't understand the degree to which. And it's kind of that same thing, it's just sort of heightening the awareness and the commitment to just a higher level. And what one writer responded, it's like, yeah, why would we contribute to the demise of the actual the ecosystem that we are depend on, which is what we're doing when we do that,
Yep.
when we depend on Amazon. So anyway.
No, thank you. And I agree. And I'll take this opportunity to give a shout out to our partners and friends at DC's The Potter's House. And they work, they're an independent bookseller, and they are part of this, microverse that is thriving despite all the odds. And I always ask writers, if you're not subscribed to at least a handful of literary journals, shame on you, because talk about the people that are doing the real heavy lifting on behalf of writers, and exposing voices that might not otherwise have an outlet. We need to celebrate the people that are doing so much work behind the scenes on our behalf.
That's right.
Okay, so to take it from 2021 way back, my favorite question: why have you not read Moby Dick? Or if you have, is there a classic that you wanted to revisit or visit for the first time?
Well, I have not read Moby Dick. And the reason, well, I'm going to give you the reason that I was going to say, but I may have more to say about that. But I would say my ostensible reason would be I'm woefully undereducated. So, you've read my book, so there's like big gaps there. Like I kind of barely sort of pretend finished high school. I was in a alternative school by the time I was in my last couple of years of high school, and it was based on it was literally called open school, so it was based on a validation system. There were no credits, and the long and short of that is I was able to squeak my way to a diploma without really having done most of the core work that a person would do in high school. And then kind of same situation in college. I squeaked around that and was able to, I didn't finish, but was able to do my MFA based on my writing history. So I have a lot of gaps, Sean. So that would be the ostensible answer. But then I think that the reason that I still haven't, like I could have by now, right?
Right.
And I think that it's because I'm more interested in trying to fill all the other gaps. Like, I want to read Audre Lorde and Edith Wharton and Toni Morrison and, the Bronte sisters and Virginia Woolf, more of Virginia Woolf and Gertrude Stein. And there's just so many that are higher now on my priority list where I say, if I'm going to go back and re-educate myself, my attention is in a little bit different direction.
Absolutely, totally fair. And I should always make the disclaimer. It's a completely self-indulgent question, only because I consider it one of my missions in life to kind of demystify Moby Dick. Because I think when people do dive into it, they find that even though it's ironically, a boring white book written by a white male about a white whale, it's such a ahead of its time in terms of a real attention to the democracy of America. I mean, it's not head in the clouds. It's a writer that's celebrating immigrants and the lower classes and full of poetry and love. But that's my sidebar. But it is not meant to separate those that are well read versus those that are not. In fact, it's poking fun at the notion that most people hate it and hate the experience of having read it in high school. So you probably didn't miss out on anything.
Well, you kind of got me curious now, like to go in and have another peek. I mean, I know I've started it
Yeah.
numerous times, so okay, I have to give it
Well,
another try.
I'll circle back with you. I'll share an essay I wrote that
Okay,
makes my case.
yeah, no, I would like that.
Okay, fair enough. All right. All right, getting back to you. Another difficult one, but I think I've got a sense, and anyone that has read you, but if you could say, is there a single theme or topic that your work seems or seeks to address?
Well, I had a perfect help with this question and answer. Yesterday, a review came out for my book in The Rupture by a writer who I don't know. I didn't know the review was coming. Her name is Samantha Page Rosen, and she said, and a couple of my writing friends pointed this out to me, which I enjoyed because I had also singled in on this line. She said that my work is about the eternal process of becoming.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought, thank you, Samantha Page Rosen. I talk about becoming, like, as a writing teacher, I talk about that a lot. And it's absolutely a theme that I'm really fascinated in. And she singled out a line from the book that where the narrator says it takes so long to become anything, especially yourself. And I thought, yeah, okay, thank you. This is helpful. You've helped me articulate something that's been a little bit, not that I didn't have access to it, but just a little bit less clear, a little bit more, muddied. And so I like that, and I'm going to claim it.
I love it, and that I concur. I think it's a beautiful, succinct assessment. But that was one of the things that I really moved me about the work was there's a real humility that I think is necessary, not only for any writer but any human being, to recognize that wherever we started is not where we end up, and there is kind of this inherent. I think one thing that separates writers from other people is this abundance of empathy and curiosity and understanding that You know, none of us have any assurances, and where we are, there's always the possibility of reinventing or refining, but we're all works in progress. And I find that, you know, I think most people probably find that very liberating as opposed to confining, right? There's a reason why the people that bore us are the people that kind of live for their high school glories and tell the same stories. It's like, I'm more excited about what's going to happen next year.
Right.
So there's the eternal naivete but optimism of writers, I think, that separates those that, you know, continue to write past the age of X and are still inspired and inspiring. So yeah, I mean, and I'll bring it around to you and say, having read the memoir, like that made me excited to read more. You know, I want to follow your trajectory as a writer and a person. So getting back to that magic and how that happens.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. So speaking of your next work or working, I tend to conflate the next two questions because they're kind of interconnected, which is the notion of writing routines and writer's block. So I just kind of throw it out. Do you believe in either? And talk a little bit about your process, and if you've ever had, you know, bouts of being blocked, how you've overcome that.
Mhm. I mean, I think both the blocking is a really interesting question. And you know, we chatted a little bit before, we went live about my writing biography starts in my 20s. I started publishing in my 20s, but it was very much in service to the goal of contributing to our family's income. And so it was a kind of writing, my priorities were around what would I get paid to write? And, this was 30 years ago. And so at that time, you could still write for magazines for $1 or $2 a word. So it wasn't like all of the writing you could get paid to do was technical writing or, but the idea of like completing a big project and not knowing if I would get paid for it wasn't really an option, so everything was kind of had to be contractual and based on a deadline and a known check at the end of the process. And so I think that, the idea of like necessity is the mother of invention. I didn't have a luxury of being blocked as a writer. I had to, I think the good thing about writing professionally in that way for so long is that I became acclimated. I developed a very strong muscle memory of just getting it done. Like you have to do it. At least for me, when there was a deadline, I'm pretty much I do what I say I'm going to do. And so, so when it came to like gradually shifting more toward my creative literary work, I feel like I've still applied that same kind of externalized. I'm pretty able to, even though there theoretically isn't, for better or worse, there's no publisher out there right now just waiting on bated breath with a deadline for me to submit my next work,
Right.
But I can work as if there is. I think I can externalize a deadline for myself that feels real. So yes, and I think there's always tricks. I'm a zero waste writer. So if I am blocked on a particular project, like I feel like there's always a way to engage with work, even if it's pre-writing, even if it's revising something else, or just, like my husband and I have 6 kids between the two of us. So they're all grown now, but and I've always worked full time, except for when my kids were little. I've always had a really busy schedule. So I can't afford to
Yeah.
sort of stare at the screen and tear out my hair. Like that isn't going to work, and if it really came to that, because I'm just too tired or, then I will acknowledge I cannot do this right now. It's like a right now thing. I need to go take a walk or I need to take a nap or something, but I wouldn't call that blocked. I would just call it being pragmatic. Like I'll be more productive if I do something else for a little while first. So that's kind of how I feel about that. And then with writing routines, I also haven't really, I'm I'm a messy desk person. I'm not I do not have like my routines make sense to me. My systems make a certain amount of sense to me, but no one else, they would look like a mess. And I have terrible organizational skills, but great compensatory skills. So people think like on the outside, they're like, you're so organized. And I'm like, everybody who knows me really well knows that that's not true, but I tend to deliver. So it seems like I am. And I think I'm in the Ann Patchett school where this is leading is in the Ann Patchett school of like, I'm an Aries and I don't know when her birthday is, but it's sort of like, don't tell me there's one right way to do things or that I have to write for an hour in the morning or that I have to, she went to a writing residency. The story I like about her is that apparently, and I didn't know this, there's some big thing about like don't have your desk face a window because it will be distracting and you need to like have like a, more of an enclosed bubble to get your work done.
Right.
So she got to the residency. I don't know if it was McDowell or I don't remember where it was, but the
Right.
first thing she did is immediately dragged her desk over to the window, like in defiance of this idea of that there's that there's a one right way or or a one wrong way, but rather that you just have to find the way. I think
Yeah.
Shirley Jackson, I think it was, wrote on her she'd stand at the dryer and write while the kids were little, and just like wherever whatever works. Diane Zinna, who I know wrote her novel in her car.
Amazing. Yep. Amazing story. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just like you got to find whatever works, let go of the idea of perfection. If perfection works, then great. But like for me, if I held myself to that, I would never feel if that's what it means to like do it right, then and if I had to do it right, then I would never do it at all. So
Yep. Well, and I think what this series has done is obliterate the notion that, of course, there's not one right way, and what might work for someone doesn't work for someone else. And more, I think, and more importantly, is really demystifying the the idea that you can be blocked or have a routine is a privilege. And most
yeah.
writers that I talk to, most writers I know, uh, in theory would love to have a life where it's like I wake up at 4 and swim laps and then I come to my desk and then I take a walk. It's like most of us are fitting writing in to our lives, and that's, I think, ultimately, among many other factors, what separates those that continue to do it is despite the obstacles you make or find the time. And it's not fair, right? We could really break that down, like how society and factors, circumstances can derail promising careers, but if it's important enough, you get it done, period.
Yeah, and you have to want it enough, which is what makes it important. It's like really being tuned into that desire, that vulnerability of wanting. And, because we're not going to, just because we want to make something with our writing doesn't mean it's going to work out, but to be fully engaged. Yeah, it's like that, what I said about my younger self. Well, I couldn't really do it if there wasn't something guaranteed. And that like doesn't work in a creative life, which is why it took, a considerable amount of time to cross that threshold and say, no, I have to actually just accept that vulnerability, that I may invest a lot of time, effort, blood, sweat, tears, etc. And it may not, nothing may come of it. And that's part of it too. I just have one little tiny practical thing to add, though. I do believe that regardless of how messy or unconventional it looks, there is wisdom in the notion that once you're in a project, whatever it may be, it does help considerably to stay engaged, if not daily, just as often as possible, even if it's for a very short time. But just, it's like, I think of it as there's this very thick, like brick or concrete wall between yourself and the material. And it's a lot of work to get through that wall. And once you're through it, you're very best off to stay on the right side of it, which means staying engaged with the work. And Robert Olin Butler, From Where We Dream is his craft book on fiction, speaks really eloquently about that, as does Elizabeth Gilbert in her book Big Magic, where she talks about having let a project sit for too long and then it's gone. So I would just say that would be the one thing that seems to prove itself most of the time. I don't think there are any like 100% things, but just I try to stay on the right side of that wall of resistance once I'm through it.
Right. Right on. Okay. How about a setback, artistic or otherwise, that, looking back has kind of put you on the trajectory you find yourself on as a writer?
I mean, there've been many, but I think that the one that stands out that was really memorable, is that when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I was editing a parenting magazine here in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the publishers at the time had given me very free reign. They had just sold off the alternative weekly newspaper here was called City Pages, and they had sold. This was when all of those were consolidating, and so it was bought by the Stern Publishing, which owned the Village Voice and a couple of other really big ones. And so anyway, so they were very busy with all of that, and kind of gave me the keys to the car. So I got to do poetry and fiction and stuff like parenting magazines. These like newsprint parenting local magazines were not doing at the time.
Right.
It was really great. And I got to meet so many amazing writers who freelanced for me. And one of them at that same time was a part of a parenting community that I was a part of. Um, the term for the parenting, I don't know that people talk about this so much anymore, but back then we called it attachment parenting, so like our kids slept with us and breastfed for a long time and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And she wrote a book called Attachment Parenting. And then she had an agent, and she sold a second book on having a larger family. And she asked me to co-write it with her. So we wrote the proposal together. Her agent loved the proposal, sold it to one of the, I can't remember now, it was one of the big five, like Penguin or something like that.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, my friend was going through a difficult time. And so she asked me to, I don't know how many pages we were supposed to turn in by a certain time. We had signed the contract, gotten our first third advance.
Wow.
And so I did what Katie asked me to do, which was essentially take the lead on this first, 100 pages or something like that. And this was in about the year like 1998 or something. And when Katie sent it off to her agent, who sent it off to the publisher, and there had been a change in editorship by this time, as is often the case. So brand new editor had never, had no investment in the project. I'll never forget, I got a phone call from Katie. This was back in the days when we still called each other and didn't text. And I remember where I was sitting on the stairs in my old house, like kind of sitting on the stairs. And Katie said, and she lives in Knoxville, has a little bit of a Southern drawl. And she said, Jeannie, she hated it. She hates it. She just hates it. And she was not kidding. This editor hated it so much, killed the whole deal. It was just over. So I think you could call that a bit of a setback. And essentially she was, just like, this doesn't sound at all like Katie. Katie, this is not at all like your first book. And it wasn't, because Katie had, stepped back and it was a completely different voice, a completely different approach. It was me. And she hated it. So really, that was quite a disappointment. There isn't really any way to soften that one, but there you go.
Is there does the story continue, or did the project just kind of die there?
Sean, the project died, dead, Deadsville, right there, over, never to be remote. There was no even like possibility of breathing new life into it. It was just over.
Wow.
And I like, as far as the project itself, in some ways, it was a nonfiction service journalism kind of book. It wasn't like a passion project for me, but it was a great opportunity, to have to co-author, yeah. And I think trying to make it into something. I think the reason that the editor hated it so much was because I probably was taking some liberty to make it a little bit more literary and creative. I trend a certain way in my writing, but it didn't fly.
Well, I mean, I think anyone would hear that story and feel some pain, but for a writer to hear a story like that is exceedingly difficult to stomach. But silver lining that I'll force into it is that and this is anyone watching this, right? This is a exhibit A. How do I go on? I must go on. Thank goodness for us readers that you did persevere and do other work. But wow, that's a tough one.
That's a doozy, huh?
Yeah. Well,
She didn't even try to pass it off as like, our priorities have changed. It doesn't really fit on the list anymore. It was like, no, she just outright hated it.
In a weird,
You could
perverse
tell the
way,
story,
you
so.
almost have to admire that type of honesty. It's like, wow, wow.
Seriously, because you're gonna be thinking that anyway. Gosh, she probably hated it. It's like, at least she just was, yeah, transparent about it.
Well, shame on her for not trying to do right by the writers, but that's
Mm.
fodder for another conversation. But that's a good segue, I think, to the next question, which is like, it's a tough one, but if you could define or explain what literary success, which I have to put in quotation, like, but define what literary success means to you.
Mhm. Well, I believe that it's a two-part process. And I guess it is a process because it's not like you're successful and then you just like, have arrived. Like I think success means you're engaging. But I think the first part is that you're finishing work. And so, when I mentor writers, sometimes, newer writers have a lot of anxiety over whether or not, like, this whole question of like, am I a writer? Can I call myself a writer? What does that really mean? And I feel like finishing work is arduous and painful, and um, there's that necessary grief of acknowledgement of when it's as good as it's going to get, for this writer at this time and this place. And I think serious writers all feel that, so I can hardly look at my book. I actually still don't read out of the book itself. I always like make a document for myself because it's painful to not be able to keep making it better in a way. So I think finishing and being able to engage in that process, and the radical sort of self honesty of being uh, yeah, to be able to look at your work and see you, to be able to own when it's working, and to say this is good, this is good enough to send out. It's painful that I can't make it better, but it is good enough, and to develop that muscle of self-discernment in the work. So I think that to me is one thing. So it's easy what I'm trying to say. That's a long, roundabout way of saying that it's fine to be a person who writes, and you can write and you can work on a lot of different projects, but there is a reason why people sometimes stay in that place of not finishing and then just switching projects, and then getting a certain way down that road and then switching again. And back to Ann Patchett, she said when she was at Provincetown working on her first novel, and is it The Magician's Assistant? I think that might be the first. But anyway, she was there with Elizabeth McCracken, and she got to this point and she was like, this book, it's not working. I need to start over. I need to start a new project. And Elizabeth McCracken said, absolutely not. You need to finish this book and then you get to start a new project. And if it's a bad book, it can be a bad book, but you still have to finish it. And Ann Patchett says to this day that every time she's so grateful for that sort of that, like, strong friend,
Yeah.
because she gets to that point in every book project, of like just throw
Right.
one away and start a new one. So I think that success is for the finishing, and then I think work that makes people feel something. That's what's important to me, is just, does it make somebody feel something?
And listen, so thank you for that. It definitely echoes, not surprisingly, answers that I think that the reality is, even if one is either fortunate or good enough or whatever the combination is to have a big success, hey, more power to any and all writers that have a big success or a modest success. But everybody I talk to, and I certainly feel the same way, is if you haven't made yourself proud, or you don't feel you did what you set out to do in some way that will outlive you, it's going to be a very hollow experience. And I can't speak for, I know some writers have had big successes, but I think no matter what you sell or who says what, if you know in your heart you didn't kind of do your best job, I have to imagine that, boy, that's one way of defining success. It's a very American way, but that's why there, I think, are a lot of unhappy artists in the world, because they don't have that sense of serenity that comes from doing your best job and then being able to leave it behind and move on to something else.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. You've kind of alluded to this, but specifically, can you say, as someone especially that teaches, is there something that you wish you had known as a writer 10 or even 20 years ago?
Yes, and it's really clear for me, which is that I wish I had understood the power of community. So I wrote in isolation, for most of the years of my writing life. I was a young mother with toddlers and I was doing it. And my whole life, this is like a biography of like doing things like through the side door and like the way I described high school or,
Yeah.
and I think that, for a lot of complex biographical and temperamental reasons, I, um, preferred that. I preferred just being a lone actor and just kind of doing my thing.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that, and I began to learn it when I began teaching, when I founded Elephant Rock and started teaching workshops and retreats back, almost 10 years ago now. And slowly what was started to happen is this community, this writing community began to form and sustain.
Yeah.
And so that, and then it began to broaden and it began to overlap more and more with then when I did my MFA with, the existing literary community and academies.
Yeah.
And as all of that started to come together, I I can't believe that ever didn't have that. And it's just life changing. So I would say, and whenever I do have a couple of young men writers I'm mentoring right now, it's just like, it matters. I wish I had understood how much it matters. And I didn't know, and I didn't have a mentor or I didn't have anyone to really tell me. And I'm not sure that I would have been able to listen or implement anyway, but it's just profound to have a literary community of friends and fellow writers and editors and booksellers and just across the spectrum of people who care about writing and stories and books and poetry and literature, and to be like an active, like you said, literary citizenship, to be an active part of that is just, yeah, I can't quantify the importance of it. And so I would say to any writer, any beginning writer, don't underestimate how profoundly important that can be.
Well, I mean, here, that's a mic drop moment. I'll just simply add that you articulated in your own beautiful way, really kind of the impetus behind 1455, which is this notion of building community and celebrating creativity. There's so many of these things can sound like buzzwords, but those that have been converted, there's a reason for this passion because we've seen the profound life altering changes that occur when you're part of a community. And it does make what can often necessarily be a very solitary endeavor. We talked about the need to get the work done, and that's on the writer.
Mhm.
But again, and I'll just use my own kind of talking point, which is, look, success can be defined a lot of different ways. But I think it's safe to say that even if one does achieve radical success by certain measures, if you're not part of a community, I just have to think it's going to feel very hollow. And it does call to question, what am I doing all this for? Where I think you and I think one of the reasons that your work resonates with me, you as a person resonate with me, is I think we both have this passion of understanding why being part of a community is so important and affirming, and the genuine joy that comes out of trying to help others find their voice. Celebrating the act of storytelling.
And we're so grateful for it, truly, Sean. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. That's what I'm talking about, and I'm talking about people like you and just this entire experience of, I've said, you know, to myself and anyone who will listen so many times, I'm glad that this book is now, not 10 years earlier. It would have been a completely different and much more sad and lonely experience. So, the earlier a person can do that work and form that community and be an active participant, like you said, paying it forward and, you know, the better, because just a hugely different experience. So thank you to you and everyone out there who's helping to make this literary community what it is. Because
Well, thank you. And I'll say what I usually say, and it's the truth, is I appreciate that, but it's very selfish. It's a very selfish endeavor. Nothing turns me on more than talking about creativity and then celebrating, art and the creation of it and the celebration of it. So for me to talk with people like you and have that solidarity reinforced is for me, is paid back, many times over. So yay. Okay. Finally, if you had a 1-minute exhortation, and again, it's so obvious that you were a teacher, because I think all of your responses have been very helpful for aspiring writers. But speaking particularly to someone that maybe is either younger or less experienced, kind of a 1-minute piece of advice for a writer trying to find their way, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to keep doing the work and just keep doing it. And I would send them the clip of Ira Glass where he's talking about how it's called The Gap, for anyone who wants to look for it. It's a little, you can find it just by Googling Ira Glass, The Gap. But he's talking about how you get into this, and it could be any kind of art you're trying to make because you have good taste, and you like, how it makes you feel, and you want to make this good work, and you want your work to be like that. But then you go to try to make work and you recognize, oh, it's not that. It's not, there's this gap. And he talks about the only way, to close that gap is to keep doing you have to make a huge body of work, and you have to keep improving it, and measuring it against what you're trying to achieve. And again, that comes back to that radical, honesty, self-discernment. You have to be willing to develop that muscle of trusting your own assessment of your work, but just to keep at it and keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. I think that's it. That's what I would say. You've got to keep doing the work, which includes finishing work.
Yeah, I think that sums up everything beautifully. And I think that's again, this series has just reinforced, the bad news is there's no shortcuts. There's no, you can't hack a novel or a memoir. There's no life hack that you can do. But the good news, I think we all agree, is the payoff for the individual is indescribable if you do see it through and end up with something that you're proud of. There's nothing that can compare with that. And I think that's what keeps us going. But also then to have the support and encouragement and solidarity. I don't use that word lightly. The solidarity of sensitive, empathetic people, creative people, just makes, again, what could be and shouldn't be a very lonely experience into something so powerful.
Yeah.
So, well, Jeannine, I thank you for being here. It couldn't have had a better time learning from you. And I will leave it at, folks, I think there's something wrong with you if you've heard this conversation and are not compelled to go buy The Part That Burns. But let me just say very sincerely that an unbelievably beautiful book, and I just recommend it to everyone. I think there's something in there, but especially for creative types, you're going to get a lot out of this book, and it makes me really happy to recommend it and see it connecting with a deserving audience. So Jeannine, thank you for all the work you do and putting that work out there for us to benefit from.
Well, thank you so much for that, and have a great rest of your time in Miami.
I will. Now it's time to go jump in the pool or something, but yeah. This was great. And we will be in touch soon, because we've got a summer festival coming up that I know you're going to be involved in, and I'm really excited that you are. So we will meet again, my friend.
All right. Talk soon, Sean.
Okay. Be well.